Llama Index is a toolkit for connecting large language models with your external data. In the next several videos, we'll explore the use of Llama Index and other AI tools such as LangChain to automate financial analysis. Now, what is financial analysis? Well, we're going to focus on some of the tasks listed here, such as gathering data, organizing information, analyzing results, making forecasts and recommendations, and generating reports. So the first use case I want to discuss is the automated analysis and synthesis of financial news and creating reports and recommendations based off that financial news. Financial news is moving really quickly these days. There's so much going on that there's no way for your weak human brain to keep up with it, right? There's just too much out there. What I want to be able to do is to digest the entire universe of financial news and extract just the important bits. I want to digest it in a few seconds, extract what's important, summarize it, write reports on it, create forecasts, and generate investment ideas, and maybe even for my existing investments, evaluate possible risks in the news that may impact my investment. Now, what is the computer program we're going to write to do this? What is it going to look like? Well, it's going to look just like this. Here is some of the code. It's only going to be about 30 lines of code. We're going to write code to automatically fetch all of the news for any given number of stock symbols. I'm going to be using my brokerage for this, Interactive Brokers, because it has an API for access to news, and I'm going to pull down all the news for all these symbols, and we're going to end up with thousands of articles on all these different stock symbols. Notice these are recent. This is all recent news from April, like from last week. For these stocks, I can run it again and pull all of the latest news up to the minute. So instead of me reading thousands and thousands of news articles, what I'm going to do is use Llama Index and just a few lines of code in this toolkit to create an index of all of the news articles in this directory. Once I have that index, I can just write a simple query, so another few lines of Python code, and I can just query it using natural language. And I'll say, what is Microsoft working on in AI? And this, maybe there's something new I haven't heard of recently. For instance, I'm going to run it now. Let's see what it says. Microsoft is working on developing an artificial intelligence chip that can power large language models responsible for generating human language. Chip is already available to select group of employees, and Microsoft aims to save time and money by developing its own AI chip, so it no longer has to go through chip makers like NVIDIA. Not only are we going to write this program, we're going to build upon that and create a user interface using Streamlit. And so I'm going to generate a report based on all the news it reads, so I can get an outlook. So I'm going to specify I want a single stock outlook for NVIDIA stock, for instance, and I can do that, and it's going to generate a report based on hundreds of news articles that we fetched from last week. And just like that, I have a report. The title of the report is NVIDIA Stock Outlook 2023 through 2027, a 5-year outlook. It has an introduction. It has an outlook. NVIDIA is poised for continued growth as per the 2023 through 2027 projections, expected to benefit from expanding GPU computing product lineup. We have a few data points here on a bullish outlook for autonomous vehicle prospects, data center and AI solutions, strong market position in GPUs. Our report also contains some various risks and headwinds. So it talks about NVIDIA's growth prospects, the competitive landscape, macroeconomic factors, supply chain disruptions, and regulatory hurdles. And so I was able to generate this using GPT-4. Not only can I generate a report on a single stock, I can also do a competitive analysis, so I can compare two different stocks here. And so what I'm going to do is I have a prompt that's able to do this. So I have Microsoft and Google. So I'm interested on the race between Microsoft and Google over AI, how their different moves are possibly impacting each other. So here I generated a different type of report. I wanted to compare two different companies. So Microsoft is working on Bing, Google is working on Bard. How is this competition playing out? What's going on in the news right now? And so here you go. The competition between Microsoft and Google has been heating up recently as both tech giants race to dominate AI and search engine spaces. And also it mentions, and this is very new, you see it mentions Samsung considers replacing Google search with Microsoft's Bing across its devices. And this makes you think, what's the impact on Google stock over time? And you can read this, and there's a lot of information in here about the latest news, about Bard and so forth. And you can play with the different token sizes and window sizes to create longer and longer, more sophisticated reports. So that's what we're building. So now I'm going to walk you through the code I wrote to build this thing, this financial news analyzer program. So I'm going to start with the command line application, and it'll probably be a separate video where I walk you through the user interface part of it. So I don't want this video to be too long. So The first thing you need to do is go to the GitHub link down below, and there's all the code. You can just grab it and put it on your machine, clone it to your machine with Git if you know how to do that. And once you have that, you need to do a few things. The first thing we need to do is install the dependencies, the Python packages we need. If you've been following this series, you already know about the OpenAI package and pandas. And in my channel, I've already done tutorials on Streamlit, pandas, and interactive brokers. So this IB and sync. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of background knowledge. Some people are like, I don't know how to program. Can you do this for me and all that? Like, the intent of this channel is that I build up over time to get more and more advanced. So you need to go further back on the channel and you'll see the prerequisites to get to this point. So at this point, you should probably already know how to install Python dependencies. And so what I'm going to do is do a pip install -r requirements.txt. And what that does is install all of these Python packages that I need for this program. The second thing I'm going to do is fetch the news. So once we have the packages installed, we need to first fetch the news we want to analyze. Second, we need to index the news using Llama Index, so get these data structures prepared that allow us to easily query the news. And then we write a script to actually query the news. And so the first step here is fetching the news. So the first thing I'm going to do here is fetch all the recent news articles for given stock symbols. So I need this big corpus of text, and I want it to appear in a directory called articles. So I made a directory called articles here, and I'm making a list of symbols. And as mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using interactive brokers. So they have this application called Trader Workstation. So I've downloaded that, and I have an interactive brokers account. And I use this. The reason I'm using this is because it's interactive. It has an API. I can talk to it and see all this news that's coming in. I can access that. Anything on here, like if I want 10-minute candles for Amazon stock, I can write a Python program to access that information. I can programmatically execute trades, look at options activity, get real-time quotes, all this stuff that you can see here. I can actually do it in Python code as well. And I do that using a library called IB and sync. Now, I'm not going to walk through how to install interactive brokers and set it up. I actually have made a long interactive brokers API tutorial video on that from a few years ago that's still accurate to this day. Now, full disclosure, interactive brokers is a supporter of this channel. That's why I have a link to it below that supports the channel. Thank you. But I made this video and other videos on it before that. So all these pros and cons are not biased right here. This video was made before any affiliation there. Now, if you want to use some other type of news source or, get it from Google and other places and put that in here, feel free to save some text documents or HTML documents and just throw them in this articles directory. It's still going to work. I like this one just because I can give it a list of symbols and it can look it up by stock. So they've already done the work of separating out all the news articles by stock, and I can make sure those are really accurate. And so what this does right here, I go over this in the other video, but this connects to my local machine, and I have interactive brokers running on a port. I request all the different news providers in my account. So there's free news sources down here. Some people pay for news sources. So I have a paid news service that has more real-time news data. So I'm using this Benzinga Pro right here, and it has like really recent market moving information. And so I actually pay for that a monthly fee. Now this will just get all the news providers you have access to, and then you just give it a list of symbols. And so for each symbol, what I'm doing is creating a new stock object. And so that's part of IB and sync, and I'm qualifying that. So I have to get this contract ID for each stock, and then I can just call this function called request historical news, and I just give it my news provider codes and my each contract ID for each of these stocks. And then what that'll do is give me the stock headlines, right? And so let me show you what that looks like. So I'll print just the headlines. I'll comment the rest of that out. If I run that, you'll see I'm getting all these different recent headlines. And you see the provider codes. There's like briefing.com, there's Benzinga, there's several different news sources in here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to loop through each of these headlines. I'm going to loop through them. I'm formatting the date. I'm requesting each news article. So I'm using the provider code and this article ID with each article. So if I look through here, you see this is a historical news object here. You see it has a timestamp, has an article ID and a provider code. So this is, I think, briefing.com, and that's the article ID. And so I can request the full text of that article just like that, store it in an article, and then I'm just going to create a new file, and I'm going to save that article text to a file. So I'm going to open a new file. I'm choosing the format of my file name. So you can format it however you want, but I want to save it in a directory called articles. I'm saving the date, the symbol, and the article ID, and I'm giving it an extension.html because these are in HTML format when you get them. And then so I'm just opening each article, a new file, and I'm just writing that text to this directory. So I'm going to run this with that uncommented, and you're going to see how this fills up with tons of news articles. So fetch news. Look at that. Tons of news from Microsoft coming in, 419, 420, 421, and so forth. So tons of Microsoft articles coming in there. You see I'm getting my recent NVIDIA articles right now as well. And so tons of information coming in right now. And so that's all going to fetch, and it's happening very quickly. All right, so now you should have a directory with some news or financial text, or really whatever type of text you want. This channel is focused on finance. You just populate this with a bunch of files with plain text in here. And how do we prepare this text so that we can query it and ask it questions? Well, first, we need to build an index, and this is where we get to actually using Llama Index, and this is a shockingly little code here. So the first thing I'm doing, since we're using Llama Index, we've already installed all these different packages. So the first thing is you do pip install Llama Index. I already installed it from requirements.txt, but if you haven't installed it for whatever reason, you need to install Llama Index like that. So it's already installed for me. The next thing we're going to do is give it our OpenAI API key. We've done this in the series many times. In your OpenAI account, there's a manage account section. You can get your API key right there. You need to set it in an environment variable. So that's why I imported OS. So os.environment, and then you do OpenAI API key equals whatever your API key is. Now, I store mine in a config file here. There's many ways to store this. So you can see there's OpenAI API key right there. And I'm not showing you my API key. That's private information. Now, the next thing we're going to do is import a couple of packages from Llama Index. So we need this GPT simple vector index and simple directory reader. Now, what is simple vector index? So if you go to the starter tutorial on the Llama Index page, you'll see they download it, but we've already installed it. And then it says build and query index. And so you see this is the exact same thing basically right here. So we're importing GPT, a simple vector index. There are other different types of indexes. So if you go to this reference under indices here, I click that, and you can see there's many different types of index data structures. So you see I have list index, table index, there's even structured store index, knowledge graph, vector store, tree index. I'm starting with this tutorial. We'll build on this, but we're starting with very simple stuff just to show you something useful. And then we'll do more advanced things like we can even generate SQL statements and other cool stuff like that. But the gist of this is in the previous several videos in the series, we learned how to use OpenAI to do semantic search and financial question answering. And that was on data that we've had in podcasts, YouTube videos. We did earnings transcripts and a bunch of different data sources. And we did this very manually by chunking up our data. So we figured out ways to chunk up our data into paragraphs. We vectorized it using the word embeddings API. And then we used this cosine similarity to find the closest text to our query or our search. And then we did a lot of manual work in manipulating pandas, data frames, and so forth to get our answer. And this worked, and this was great. And you can still do that. And it's important to understand those concepts. It's not that hard, but what's great about a tool like this, as these technologies evolve, there's toolkits being released like GPT Index or Llama Index and LangChain that are kind of simplifying all this. So just like on the web, you could write a complicated PHP script for your web application, but all these frameworks come out to make it shorten the amount of code we need to write and have common utility functions. And so this GPT simple vector index handles like a lot of that manual work we did with like keeping track of token count and the size of our prompts and all that kind of stuff. And so there's many different packages and tools to simplify a lot of these tasks that are built into Llama Index right here. Also, you notice that I imported simple directory reader. And what's great about that is you can just specify a directory name, so articles, and say, read this directory and load all those documents right there. You notice that's just one line of code. I didn't write a bunch of code to like loop through all the documents and call some API or call some other function, all that. I just said load this directory of data. And so another benefit of Llama Index is I have these data connectors here. And so let's pretend you work at a company that has lots of information inside of Google Docs. There's a Google Docs reader. You have some knowledge that's embedded in your Slack channel or Discord channel. Boom, there's a Discord reader. Maybe there's some cool chats there that have information. There's Notion. You can read PDF files, Word documents, all types of stuff. Then data exists in so many different places. And so, yeah, maybe I want to read Google Docs. So That's great right there. And so now all I got to do is say read all the documents in this articles directory, load it up, and then I say create me a vector index from documents, and I pass it these documents here, and that's my index. And so I create that index. It gets stored in a variable called index. And so I don't want to generate that over and over again, because remember, generating those embeddings costs a little bit of money. It's like a penny or a couple of cents, I think, to do what I'm doing here. So instead of doing the computation and calculating this over and over again, generating this index to ask a question, I want to save or cache a copy to the disk. And so I can do index.save to disk. So I call that function and give it the name of a file. And so I'm going to run this now, and you run that, and we should see a file name get generated right here, and that's going to contain our index, right? And the idea here is I don't have to worry about what all these data structures look like and how Llama Index decides to look through and organize data and query it and embed it and so forth. This is all abstracted away. So even like if you know some basic coding, the idea is that you should be able to do something like this, provided you understand how to create a Python environment and install dependencies and so forth. So this is calling OpenAI functions, the embeddings API. And so you can see this is now finished, and it gives a token counter. It says 815,000 tokens. And so this is keeping track of cost for me. Here on OpenAI, you can see the pricing per 1,000 tokens. And so if you go down to embeddings here, which we discussed in the embeddings video, it's 0.00004 cents per 1,000 tokens right there. And so if I go to one of my OpenAI accounts here, you see I have this one. And today, I've used 99 cents already today, but I've been doing other stuff like off the camera that is not in a YouTube video. So what I did there probably cost a few cents. So I saved it to the disk, and now the next time I run this, I want to actually load this index from this file. I don't want to regenerate the index. And so the next step, once we've indexed our data, we want to query our data. So all I do, same thing again, provide my OpenAI key, and I don't need to load the directory anymore. I just import GPT simple vector index, just like that. And then instead of generating the index again, I'm loading it from disk. So I give it the file index structure, and you see this structure has all kinds of stuff in here, but the idea is that these tools are supposed to abstract this away so that I don't need to worry about the lower level details of these data structures that Llama Index creates. Now, if you want to understand this in detail, feel free to read this documentation and read through how each index works and how it creates these nodes and synthesizes and stores all this information and prepares it for querying, and it discusses the different types of indexes, which we will get to in a future tutorials. Now, the beauty of this, once I've loaded this index from disk, look at this. I have this function. So on an index, I can call index.query, and then I can just give it a string with a question, and it will give me a response. And so I'm saying first, what are some near-term risks to NVIDIA? So that's something I was thinking about. I had a fairly large NVIDIA position, and I was like, should I get rid of this and book the gain? So let's just see if there's any near-term risks based on the news I just fetched a few minutes ago. And the near-term risks it gave are potential escalation of the standoff between US and China over chip exports, looks like short sellers, and then also the company's success in AI space could be short-lived as competition heats up in the near future. So NVIDIA's had this huge lead, but there's other competitors. As we learned earlier when I demonstrated this, I wanted to see what Microsoft's working on in AI. And you see here that Microsoft is developing its own AI chip, and maybe they don't have to go through NVIDIA. Same thing with Google. I can say, tell me about Google's advancements in AI or their new supercomputer. And it also says they're working on their own chips. So right now, there seems to be a lot of different people working on their own custom chips. And so you can see here, Google is not sleeping here. They're working on their own chips. They're actively working on their own language models. They're not just going to let Microsoft steamroll them, I don't think. And they're not just going to, everyone's not just going to pay NVIDIA billions of dollars to use their chips. A lot of people are working on their own, which is a potential risk. Even though I believe AI has a huge future, there's going to be a lot of competition, which is why I was happy to book my gain while I had it. And so another thing I noticed is that Taiwan Semiconductor, you would think they're making all these different chips, right? You would think that their stock would be taking off right now. But if you look on Friday, I'm recording this on the 22nd. It looks like it fell 4% that day. So what's the deal there? why is the price of Taiwan semiconductor dropping? Maybe I can search the news real quick and see what happened there. You can search on Google, but the nice thing about this is I can automate things and aggregate lots of information all at once. And it talks about recent tensions in China and Taiwan. Now, Llama Index has a ton of functionality, and I'm going to wait till the next video to describe more. I just wanted to give you a start to my series on financial analysis, starting with news, and kind of talk about financial news in general for a bit, and give you a quick introduction to Llama Index and some working code. But in the next video, we'll talk about creating a UI with Streamlit, because I already talked about Gradio and I talked about Flask, but Streamlit's a pretty good library for creating user interfaces. And I'll talk about another feature of Llama Index, which is that we can actually swap out the language model we're using. Now, in this video, I used the default language model. So I used GPT-3, which is the default, but I have access to GPT-4 now, and maybe you do. I don't know if that's available to everyone yet, but I want to talk about how Llama Index, you can actually swap out the language model with one of your own using something called a service context here. And so what we can do is use the larger token limit of GPT-4, and we can say write these really long reports. And so I'll show you how to write that Streamlit application to write a really lengthy report that compares two different companies using all the latest news. And so yeah, that'll be in the next video. This is the first video on financial analysis and Llama Index. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one. Thanks, bye.